Hello, lovelies. So I have to admit that ever since autumn has arrived, I have found myself absolutely craving rich and hearty comfort foods. It may also have something to do with the fact that I am pregnant, but either way, I am definitely in a comfort food frame of mind right now, which is why today I'm super excited to be sharing with you this absolute classic beef stew recipe that was the beef stew my mom made me as a kid and has become an absolute fixture in my house since the weather started getting a little bit cooler. It's actually really easy to prepare. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's so super delicious. Now to get started, I have got some oil heating up in a nice big pot on the stove. You can either use a soup pot here or a Dutch oven like I'm using. And I'm just going to get my beef into the pan. So for this recipe, I am using some stewing beef that I've cut into about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch cubes. And you wanna make sure your beef is in a single layer in your pot because you don't wanna overcrowd it. You wanna let it get browned all over. You can hear that great sizzle. That is always a good sign in the kitchen. And I'm just gonna hit my beef liberally with some salt and some pepper. Now for this recipe, I am using some good old-fashioned stewing beef. You can pretty much find it in the meat department at any supermarket. Stewing beef is quite affordable, which is why I love it so much. And the idea here is that we are going to be cooking this over several hours. So even though stewing beef tends to be a bit on the tougher side, it doesn't matter because all of that time is going to help our beef really soften up, become nice and tender, and almost start falling apart. And that is exactly what we want. Now we're just going to move our beef around in our pan, make sure it gets evenly browned on all sides. At this point, it's time to add some flavor to this. And today I'm going to be doing that with a classic combination of vegetables, including some onion, some celery, and some carrots. We're just going to get those into the pot and let them cook away for another, say, 4 or 5 minutes, just until that onion becomes nice and translucent. You'll notice that celery starts to turn bright green and your veggies have had a chance to soften up just a little bit. So I have to say, when it comes to a recipe like this, often the hardest part is doing the chopping. So if you have an extra set of hands in the kitchen who can help out, I highly recommend it. I also recommend, if you're making a stew like this, to consider making a double or even a triple batch. Stew freezes beautifully, so it's one of those really incredible make-ahead dishes that not only can you enjoy through the week, but you can freeze for later. Come on, what is not to love about that? Next, we'll add some minced garlic to the pot. I'm using about 3 cloves here. You don't have to worry about overdoing it with your garlic in a recipe like this because it's going to be simmering for so long that garlic is really gonna have a chance to mellow out completely. We'll let that garlic cook away for another 30 seconds to a minute, and then I'm gonna go ahead and add a splash of red wine to the pot. Red wine is really classic in a beef stew. It is totally optional in this recipe, so if you don't have wine or you're not comfortable cooking with wine, you can totally leave it out. But I like to add about 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup into my pot. And then basically what I do is let it cook away until it's completely evaporated and all that's left is the delicious flavor. My next step, once my wine has fully evaporated, is going to be adding my potatoes to this. And as you can see, I am using a lot of potatoes here. You do not have to use as many potatoes as I'm using, but my daughter Elle is an absolute potato monster. She loves potatoes. So I always add as many as I can fit into the pot because I know that's something that she really is going to enjoy. In this recipe, I opted to use russet potatoes, which are quite starchy. Traditionally, you would use something like white or yellow potatoes, which tend to hold their shape a little bit better. But I love russet potatoes because they really start to break down and their starches help to thicken up your stew and make it even richer and more hearty. So totally up to you what kind of potatoes you use, but russets are my personal fave. We're just going to add a few more ingredients to this before we let our stew simmer away. First, we've got some beef broth. You wanna use really high quality beef broth in a stew because of course it does do a lot of the flavoring. So we're gonna get our beef broth right into the pot. And then to add even more great flavor, I like to go in with a nice splash of Worcestershire sauce. It adds a really gorgeous umami flavor to a dish like this, which I love. And I'm also going to be adding some fresh thyme sprigs. So I'm just gonna put them right into the pot. Now, you guys probably know by now just how much I love cooking with fresh herbs. And in a recipe like this, there are so many great options. You could use some rosemary here, some oregano, some sage would be really tasty, or even a bay leaf. Each type of herb will add a bit of a different sort of flavor profile, but honestly, they will all be really yummy here. I love thyme because it's so classic and has a nice earthy flavor, which is why I come back to it time after time after time. As soon as this deliciousness has reached a boil, we can pop on our lid and reduce our heat to low. We want to let our stew simmer away low and slow for at least an hour, but 2, 3, 4 hours are ideal. The longer this simmers, the more tender that beef is going to get and the more delicious this stew is going to become. And honestly, it is totally worth the wait, I promise you. Plus, you really don't have to do anything but give it a quick stir every half hour or so. You're off the hook. Go, get the dishes done and enjoy yourself. All right, lovelies, our patience has been rewarded. This has been simmering for about 2 hours now, which means it's time to finish it up. Now, the first step is just going to be removing the stems from my thyme. Obviously, we don't need those anymore, so I'll just remove them like that. And then we are going to thicken this up. And to do that, I am using what's called a cornstarch slurry. So this is actually just some cornstarch mixed with some water. You can also use some flour to thicken it up if you prefer, but to keep it gluten-free, I'm using cornstarch in this recipe. And I'm just basically going to pour it right into the pot. And you'll notice in almost no time, the mixture starts to thicken and become really saucy, almost like a gravy consistency, which is exactly what you're looking for. At this point, the final step is just seasoning this to taste with some salt and some pepper. And honestly, guys, this yumminess is ready to serve. I absolutely adore this dish. It totally will hit the spot on a cool autumn day. And if you don't believe me, I highly recommend you give it a try for yourselves. If you do, as always, be sure to tweet me, Instagram me, or Facebook me a photo because you know how much I love seeing your kitchen creations. Remember, this recipe, like all of our recipes, is being featured on healthymealplans.com, our amazing meal planning site that allows you to browse more than 1,000 recipes, drag and drop them into your weekly meal plan, and then automatically generates your shopping list for you. If you haven't checked it out already, I hope you will. I think it will make your life a whole lot easier. And finally, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe because there is lots more deliciousness where this came from.